Hello everyone. Welcome to the China Brief. We bring you the latest global media coverage on China's current affairs, economy, and society, as well as exclusive analysis. Our trustworthy, professional, and multi-perspective China reporting provides judgment and decision-making references for the world's elites. The China Brief is issued in multiple languages, including text, video, podcasts, and books, and is broadcasted 24/7 in the 6-degree world.
We bring you the latest content on China's current affairs, economy and society from the global media, as well as exclusive analysis. Our credible, professional, multifaceted China coverage provides the world's elites with judgment and decision-making references, and the website of 6 Degrees Briefing is 6dobrief.com. China Brief is available in multiple languages. Please subscribe through 6dobrief.com. China releases documentary to prepare for attack on Taiwan. The Daily Telegraph reports that China has released an 8-part documentary on its military's preparations for an attack on Taiwan, showing the commitment of soldiers willing to sacrifice their lives if necessary to invade the island. The first part of the documentary, titled Dream by Dream, was broadcast Tuesday by the State Administration of Radio and Television, SARFT, to mark the 96th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese military. The documentary, Dream by Dream, showed footage of military exercises, especially around Taiwan, and featured dramatic testimonies from dozens of soldiers. Some said they were willing to sacrifice their lives to occupy the island. "If I use up all my ammunitions in a real battle, my fighter will be my last missile to charge the enemy," said a man who identified himself as Li Peng, a pilot with the Wanhai Squadron of the Naval Air Force in China's Eastern Theater of Operations, which is tasked with missions in the Taiwan Strait. The Dream by Dream documentary series comes at a time when Beijing is stepping up pressure on democratic Taiwan, which split from China at the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, including frequent war drills. The ruling Communist Party has vowed to unify Taiwan and China, using force if necessary. Taiwan has its own government, currency and army, and only its 23 million people can decide the island's future. As Russia invaded Ukraine, fears of a possible Chinese attack rose. However, while Russian troops were able to enter Ukrainian territory by land, China and Taiwan were separated by the 110-mile-wide Taiwan Strait. In a clear demonstration of China's naval strength, the documentary shows the Chinese aircraft carrier Shandong sailing in formation with several other warships. The ship has been sailing through the Taiwan Strait frequently in recent months, in what Taiwanese analysts have called a tactic of intimidation. The series also shows the People's Liberation Army's, PLA, amphibious assault groups practicing a charge to the beach, with jets providing air cover and land and ships firing missiles, according to a report in the South China Morning Post. "I want to see the other side of the strait," said Wang Xinjie, a member of the amphibious assault group. "I have been preparing for that day." Zhuo Feng, a diver with the Navy's minesweeper unit, said in the documentary that he was willing to use his body to destroy defense facilities. "If a war breaks out and the conditions are too difficult to safely remove naval mines in actual combat, we will use our bodies to create a safe passage for our landing troops," he said. The program also showed Chinese forces conducting joint sword drills around Taiwan, simulating precision strikes on the island. The drills follow a visit to the United States by Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen in April. Beijing has been increasing its military activities around Taiwan in recent years. Taiwan's defense ministry said Sunday it had detected 20 Chinese military aircraft around the island, 10 of which crossed the center line of the Taiwan Strait, an unofficial border long considered a buffer zone between the two sides of the Taiwan Straits, or entered the southwestern portion of its air defense identification zone. The ministry said the planes were conducting joint patrols with 5 Chinese Navy ships. This is the China Briefing. Does Australia really want to be the U.S. front line against China? The South China Morning Post, SCMP, reports that the recent Australia-United States ministerial consultation, AUSMAN, has resulted in 2 major moves that will affect peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region. First, the U.S. pledged to increase its rotational troop presence in Australia and to send nuclear-powered submarines more frequently. Second, the U.S. agreed to help Australia develop its missile capabilities. These programs raised concerns about Australia's role in U.S. adventurism and its potential involvement in conflicts that are essentially not its own. The U.S. is seeking to enhance its military capabilities by involving its Asia-Pacific allies in its defense industry production chain. The move is intended to counter Ukraine's ammunition shortage, but more importantly, it sends a signal to China that the U.S. is prepared to support Taiwan in a prolonged war if necessary. Australia has become Washington's preferred partner in the region to counter China's influence, as evidenced by a statement by Australian Defence Minister Richard Marrs. Australia has no better friend than the United States at this time. This consolidation of military power and regional influence is part of the U.S. strategy of dominance and containment of China. However, Australia's habitual support for American adventurism raises concerns about its strategic choices and the potential consequences of being drawn into American geopolitics. By becoming a frontline base for the U.S. aggressive stance against China, Australia has tied itself to an unstable path that could jeopardize its foreign policy autonomy. Australia's growing military cooperation with the United States, particularly its acceptance of U.S. help in missile production, demonstrates its increased commitment to the U.S. military-industrial complex. While this allows Australia to exert influence in the Asia-Pacific region, it also exposes it to unpredictable and unfavorable outcomes in global affairs. The upgraded U.S.-Australia military cooperation is widely seen as an effort to counter China's influence in the Asia-Pacific region. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's post-Osman opposition to Chinese efforts to interfere with freedom of navigation in the South and East China Seas further underscores the intent to oppose Chinese military actions in the region. The motivation behind the U.S. push to develop Australia's missile production capability goes deeper, to position Australia as a bridgehead for potential attacks on the Chinese mainland. If Australia truly seeks peace, prosperity, and regional stability, it must carefully consider its commitment to Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy. Aligning itself too closely with the United States would have consequences that could jeopardize Australia's interests and autonomy. Australia needs to assess whether China is a friend or an enemy and prioritize its own interests over those of the United States to avoid potential conflict. Here is the China briefing. U.S. opens new mechanism for supplying arms to Taiwan, weapons can arrive quickly. The Voice of America, VOA, reports that a week ago, U.S. President Joe Biden announced that he would use his Presidential Drawdown Authority, PDA, to provide $345 million in military assistance to Taiwan, but the list of weapons to be assisted has not been made public. The U.S. Department of Defense said that this is based on Taiwan's operational security in sensitive diplomatic situation considerations. Military experts say that the United States for the first time to use the Presidential Withdrawal Authority from existing stocks to provide Taiwan with weapons and services, although it did not change the U.S. has been to support Taiwan to strengthen self-defense capabilities of the policy, but its significance lies in the U.S. to provide Taiwan with a major change in the mechanism of weapons, but also implies a closer military relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan. President Biden's July 28 memo to the Secretary of State said he would use the authority granted to the President under U.S. law, including relevant provisions of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, to direct the Secretary of State to draw down up to $345 million of U.S. Department of defense equipment and services, as well as education and training, to provide assistance to Taiwan. This is the first time a U.S. president has used this authorization to provide significant military assistance to Taiwan from its own existing stockpile, and the news has attracted a great deal of attention from all sides since its release. But what weapons does the U.S. actually provide to Taiwan? The White House did not mention it in the memo it released. U.S. Pentagon spokesman, Air Force Brigadier General Pat Ryder, on Tuesday, August 1, at a press conference was asked about the United States of America to Taiwan. This military assistance included assets, technologies and platforms. Why, in particular, what are the intelligence and reconnaissance capabilities? When asked at the press conference what assets, technologies and platforms were included in this U.S. military assistance to Taiwan, and in particular what intelligence and reconnaissance capabilities were included, the reporter said that what had been made public was all the information he could provide, and that he could not provide any more details on the specific capabilities involved in this military assistance. The reporter then asked, "Can you confirm whether drones are included and why the Pentagon has been somewhat less than transparent about that?" Ryder said, "Again, I can't say that I'm able to provide more detail on the specific capabilities in the Presidential Drawdown Authority, and the reason we're being more cautious about this is due to the operational security on the Taiwan side as well as the sensitivity of the diplomatic situation." Tensions in the Taiwan Strait have been escalating in recent years as China's military, diplomatic and economic pressures on Taiwan have been increasing. But the delay in the delivery of weapons purchased by Taiwan from the U.S. due to the new crown epidemic and the outbreak of the war in Ukraine affecting the U.S. defense industry has caused members of both parties in the U.S. Congress concerned about the security of the Taiwan Strait, through a variety of means, including legislation and the issuance of public comments, to urge the Biden administration. The Biden administration has been urged by members of both parties in the U.S. Congress to expedite the provision of Taiwan's required defense capabilities and weapons through various means, including legislation and public comments, and thus the U.S. President's first use of the presidential power of withdrawal to provide military assistance to Taiwan has also aroused great concern among all parties, and the Chinese government is even more strongly dissatisfied with this. U.S. think tank and the Center for International Studies International Security Program Senior Advisor, retired Marine Corps Colonel Mark Canchin, and China's Strength of the Project Director Bonnie Lin, published a report on Wednesday in the think tank, the U.S. for the first time to use presidential withdrawal of power to assist Taiwan to do a detailed description and analysis. In the report, titled "A New Mechanism for an Old Policy, the United States Uses Drawdown Authority to Support Taiwan," the two experts pointed out that although the use of the Presidential Drawdown Authority has been a major step forward, it is not the first time the U.S. has used it to assist Taiwan. A new mechanism for an old policy, the United States uses drawdown authority to support Taiwan. The report states that while the use of the Presidential Drawdown Authority for military support to Taiwan does not represent a change in overall U.S. policy, it does represent a significant change in how the United States provides weapons and suggests a closer military relationship. The report also mentions that it is highly unusual that this announcement of military aid to Taiwan did not include details of weaponry, because in the case of U.S. military aid announcements to Ukraine, those announcements covered very specific lists of weapons, even though Ukraine is at war and has a greater need for operational security. The lack of detail in the Taiwan military aid case may be because it is an extremely sensitive subject for China, and the U.S. would like to keep this a low profile for such efforts. However, the report said that nonetheless, because this military aid case includes the movement of many physical objects, some details may emerge, if not officially publicized, through media reports. For this military assistance and the past U.S. foreign assistance, how different, the report explains that the difference lies in the armament or service transfer mechanism. This announcement of military assistance does not exceed the scale of previous U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. Taiwan to accept this assistance is not special place, because the United States to more than 150 global allies and partners to provide military assistance, but from the United States to receive a large amount of assistance from the existing stockpile is nearly unique, originally limited to Ukraine and now there is Taiwan. The report emphasizes, however, that while this military aid is a change from the way the U.S. has provided Taiwan with armaments in the past, the fundamental U.S. policy toward Taiwan has not changed, as the Taiwan Relations Act, TRA, of 1979 states that the U.S. must provide Taiwan with defensive weapons and services so that Taiwan can maintain an adequate defense capability, but The TRA does not specify. The Taiwan Relations Act does not specify how the United States is to supply Taiwan with these defense equipment and services, which gives U.S. leaders the flexibility to decide how to do so. In the past, the U.S. has supplied arms and services through arms sales, though that is a policy choice, not a legal or treaty requirement. While U.S. policy toward Taiwan remains unchanged, the Biden administration's change in the way the U.S. provides Taiwan with military assistance is significant on three levels, the two experts said. The first is that the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023, passed late last year, provides the president with authority to draw weapons and services, military education and training from existing U.S. Department of Defense stockpiles, and direct assistance opens up the possibility of more such assistance in the future, no longer subject to Taiwan's defense spending constraints and lengthy approval process. Second, because the weapons and equipment are being drawn directly from existing U.S. stockpiles, they should be able to be called to arrive in Taiwan quickly, without going through the foreign military sales process or requiring congressional approval, which has already given the president authorization to transfer weapons. Finally, experts say the military aid represents increased U.S. support for Taiwan, as it assists Taiwan in expanding the defense capabilities that its existing defense spending can provide, so this military aid case can be seen as more direct U.S. assistance to Taiwan's defense. Further, if the U.S. provides services, then the relationship between the two militaries expands as well. Both arms sales and arms transfers show support as the U.S. synergizes both with overall defense priorities and policies. The Chinese government has expressed strong opposition to Biden's military aid to Taiwan across all of its speaking systems, from diplomacy and defense to the Taiwan Affairs Office. China's foreign ministry issued a statement on Thursday on behalf of its spokesperson on the U.S. military aid to Taiwan, saying that the U.S. provision of weapons to Taiwan seriously violates the One China principle and the provisions of the three Sino-U.S. joint communiques, especially the 87 communique, and seriously undermines China's sovereignty and security interests, as well as Sino-U.S. relations and the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait. Peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. China is strongly dissatisfied with and resolutely opposes this, and has lodged solemn representations with the U.S. side. Earlier, Tan Kefi, spokesman for China's defense ministry, also issued a statement on the military aid case on Tuesday, saying that the U.S. provision of military aid to Taiwan is gross interference in China's internal affairs and a serious threat to peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits, and that China firmly opposes it. Chen Binhua, spokesman for China's State Council Taiwan Affairs Office, said through Xinhua news agency's question-and-answer session on the second day after the White House released the military aid memorandum that Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, authorities are attempting to rely on the U.S. to seek independence, and that they are constantly praying for the U.S. to sell arms or provide military aid to Taiwan, and to strengthen its military ties with the U.S. They are constantly begging the United States to sell arms to them or provide them with military assistance, and they are strengthening their military ties with the United States. What they are doing is turning Taiwan into a powder keg and ammunition depot and exacerbating the danger of war in the Taiwan Strait. This is China Briefing. Crisis: Chinese car makers overtake German giants. Deutsche Welle reports that the German economy is facing a sense of crisis, with orders falling and consumer purchasing power declining due to rising inflation. The country's carmakers are particularly affected, as they are facing structural problems in the industry. The shift to electric mobility and autonomous driving has led to higher costs, while the necessary capital from fuel car sales is uncertain and politically unpopular. German automakers such as Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, and BMW reported increased revenues and profits in the first half of 2023. However, their outlook for the rest of the year is disappointing for investors and shareholders due to inflation, rising interest rates and declining demand for new cars. In Germany, orders are falling, particularly for battery-powered vehicles, with demand down to 60% of last year's level. Meanwhile, China is rapidly developing its electric vehicle industry to become the world's largest electric vehicle market. Chinese manufacturers are making technological advances and catching up with industry leader Tesla. Chinese car buyers are increasingly favoring domestic brands, with China's largest car maker, BYD, selling 29% more electric cars than Tesla in the first half of 2023. German carmakers including Volkswagen, Porsche, Audi, Mercedes-Benz, and BMW are feeling increased pressure from the market as Chinese brands are overtaking them in the premium segment. In the past, German luxury cars were very popular in China, but now, thanks to their advanced digital features, Chinese-produced vehicles are becoming more and more popular. Chinese consumers no longer have the patience to wait for the technology to become more widespread, nor are they willing to pay extra for the latest features. As a result, 80% of electric vehicles in China now come from domestic manufacturers, and German brands no longer dominate the top 10 sellers. Chinese brands are expected to overtake foreign brands in the overall Chinese car market for the first time this year, with market share expected to reach 51%, rising to 65% by 2030. European manufacturers will also face pressure from Chinese electric car makers in their home market. China has become the world's leading exporter of automobiles as a sales market, exporter and producer. For German carmakers, the era of record profits is coming to an end, and the German automotive industry may no longer be as dominant in the Chinese automotive industry as it has been for the past 20 years. This is China Briefing. Newfoundland's new Chinese monuments unveiled. CBC Canada reports that the Chinese community in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, recently held a ceremony to revitalize a Chinese monument, which included the unveiling of two newly crafted granite lions. The monument represents the difficulties faced by the early Chinese community in the province, including the head tax and the Chinese Exclusion Act. The renovation of the monument was the last request of Dr. Kim Hung, a prominent member of the community, before his death in 2020. The project was funded entirely by the Chinese community, totaling approximately $34,000. The two lions were made in Shandong Province, China and shipped to St. John's via Canada. One lion is a mother lion guarding a cub, while the male lion has an earth at his feet, representing the world. These lions will now guard the cemetery. The process of transporting the lions from China through customs was challenging, but ultimately successful, thanks to the hard work and solidarity of the Chinese community. About 75 people attended the ceremony, despite the bad weather. Mr. Tam Kwok, president of the Newfoundland and Labrador Chinese Association, thanked the Chinese community for their support and solidarity in making this project a reality. The old lions on the monument have been relocated to Carman Hill Cemetery. Here's the China Briefing. Blades, Rakshasa Hai Shi, China's right and wrong turned upside down, Hu Ping mourns Yu Ingshi, don't forget, cruelty is the first evil. Deutsche Welle Chinese website reports that some critics believe that Dialeng's new album, Rakshasa Hai Shi, is not only criticizing those famous celebrities, but also ridiculing the current reality in China, such as the lack of distinction between the beautiful and the ugly, right and wrong, and pointing out donkeys as chickens. It is sad that the Chinese people are powerless to change the reality of their lives and can only collectively criticize an illusory country of the great Rakshasa. Chinese musician Dolan's new album, Rakshasa Sea City, has received over 10 billion hits on Chinese social media platforms, making it a phenomenal song. Taiwan's Wind Media published an article titled Knife Lang's Rakshasa Hai Shi, which pokes at what social reality. The author, Lin Tingyao, pointed out that in addition to criticizing those famous celebrities who have been in China's entertainment industry for a long time and monopolized the rules of the game, Knife Lang's lyrics are considered by netizens as alluding to those who criticized him in the past, such as Na Ying, Yang Kun, Gao Xiaosong and Wang Feng, and also ridiculing mainland China at the present time. The Rakshasa kingdom in the song does not distinguish between the beautiful and the ugly, right and wrong are inverted, the false is said to be true, but the true becomes false, and the lyrics refer to pointing out a donkey as a chicken, which is even more ridiculous. For example, once a disaster occurs in Chinese society, the first official step is to hide it, and when it is impossible to hide it anymore, and when it triggers the effect of public opinion, the police will be deployed to stabilize the situation, so as to prevent the victims from getting into trouble. This practice tends to plant a greater factor of anxiety. According to the article, Nifelang's creation is based on the fantasy world of Liao Zhi, which is like a Chinese version of the Labyrinth of the Goat Man. Ophelia, the little girl in The Labyrinth of the Goat Man, did not want to face the fascist dictatorship of the Spanish Civil War, and put her heart in the underground kingdom full of fantasies, but she still died at gunpoint in the end. When the Chinese people are powerless to change the reality of their lives, they can only collectively criticize an illusory country of the great Rakshasa. Isn't this the sadness of being Chinese? Tahir Hamid Isgil, a Uyghur poet, filmmaker and writer living in exile in the United States, published an article in the New York Times, "The Tragedy in My Hometown of Xinjiang Could Happen Anywhere," about his own experiences during more than a decade of Chinese Communist Party, CCP, repression of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. The author says that since 2017, the Chinese government has implemented a mass detention program in Xinjiang. During that time, it is estimated that more than 1 million people, Uyghurs and members of other Muslim minorities, have been imprisoned in camps known as re-education centers. But disaster comes to us so slowly and silently that at first we cannot see it for what it is. This is how disaster often strikes. The article says, Uyghurs abroad have worked tirelessly to make the world aware of the ongoing genocide in our homeland and to demand that the world take action. We have shared our painful experiences over and over again, only we know the pain of reliving them each time. But the catastrophe does not end with the Uyghur community. To defend the human rights of Uyghurs is to defend human rights around the world. If repression can be contagious, so can justice. Common human values have a wider reach than any dictator. The author's appeal: do not ignore the signs of the spread of authoritarianism. Do not make the mistake of thinking that what happened to my people will not happen elsewhere, will not happen in your country. It will happen. Taiwan's Shang Pao published an article entitled, Yu Yingshi and Contemporary Chinese Liberalism, writing on the second anniversary of Mr. Yu Yingshi's death. The author, Hu Ping, honorary editor-in-chief of Beijing Spring, said that Mr. Yu was a globally acclaimed historian and an influential Chinese intellectual of our time. What we especially miss is Mr. Yu's deep concern for freedom of thought and political democracy in mainland China, as well as for liberal scholars and exiles in mainland China. The article points out that in his article, Hu Xi and China's Democracy Movement, 1991, Mr. Yu Yingshi spoke highly of Hu Xi's firm belief in freedom and democracy. In particular, Mr. Yu agreed that Hu Xi regarded the tolerant protection of minority rights as the essence of liberal democracy. Mr. Yu said that Hu Xi never regarded Chinese tradition as a generalized slice, and that Hu Xi's attack on Chinese tradition was mainly an attack on the cruelty of China at that time. Hu Xi's advocacy of democracy and the rule of law was also an attempt to save the country from this deep-rooted cruelty. Mr. Yu writes that today many liberal intellectuals in the West have begun to pay attention to the problem of cruelty. Some advocate that among the ordinary vices of society, cruelty should come first, because cruelty is the most intolerable sin of the liberal consciousness. According to Hu, Mr. Yu's pointing this out has new significance for China's democracy and freedom movement. Since its founding, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, has instituted a form of secularism far more complete than that of the medieval West, and has practiced tyranny far harsher than that of traditional dictatorships, beginning with ideological dictatorships and the brutal persecution of dissenting political views. Few people, from commoners to high officials, did not live in fear. The Cultural Revolution took all this to an unprecedented level. According to the article, among the Western liberal intellectuals introduced by Mr. Yu, Judith N. Schklar, a professor of political science at Harvard University, emphasized that cruelty is the first evil and liberalism of fear, which have great significance for China's democracy and freedom movement. The implications for China's democracy and freedom movement are significant. Keep up with the latest news, analysis, and policy briefings on China from around the world with China Briefing. The 6 Degrees team compiles, synthesizes and summarizes the most important information from a variety of sources, including the media, think tanks, government agencies, and industry experts. Our mission is to provide you with easily accessible and valuable information that is tailored to your specific areas of interest. We understand the importance of keeping up to date with the latest developments related to China and aim to make this information accessible to our readers. Please subscribe to China Brief at 6dobrief.com and you can receive China Brief by email anywhere in the world.